I'm Brandon Friedman. I'm a member of the Faculty of Humanities here, and I'm the Director of Research at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University.
There is a narrative out there that the violence and massacre of October 7th stemmed from the setting up of the State of Israel and its occupation of Palestinian territories. Can you talk us through the regional issues at the time that led to the need of a partition plan?
In Israeli history, there's a particular narrative about the conflict, and then there's a Palestinian narrative about the conflict, and they talk past one another in terms of how they characterize the events. And so, built into your question, obviously was borrowing language from what I would say is the Palestinian narrative about the conflict. And I would say that the dynamics on the ground at the time had to do with a process of Jewish immigration that began in the last quarter of the 19th century and accelerated with the Holocaust during World War II, and ultimately led to the British deciding that they wanted to end their custodianship, the mandate over Palestine. And the British solution for getting out of Palestine was to advocate for a solution in the UN that would lead to a partition that would divide Palestine between the Jewish issue, the Jewish community in Palestine at the time, and the Palestinian population. It was the UN that ultimately took this decision, and upon announcing partition, Israel celebrated was an opportunity to realize its ambition of getting a Jewish state in Palestine, and the Palestinians launched a war against Israel, and Israel declared its independence. After Israel was winning its war against the Palestinians that was launched after the announcement of UN partition, the Arab neighboring countries joined in to support the Palestinian effort, and that was almost the second phase of the war. And Israel won both phases. They defeated the Palestinians, and the Palestinians attacked after partition was announced. And then they ultimately defeated the neighboring states. So really, the 1948 war is described in the Palestinian narrative as Nakba, the catastrophe. And this, you could say that this is the starting point for the Palestinian narrative, in which huge numbers of Palestinians either were driven out of their homes or chose to leave their homes thinking they would be able to come back after they were victorious, and they never returned. And so the Palestinian narrative is one of victimhood and dispossession. For the Israeli narrative, it's the rising from the ashes of thousands of years of exile, of being able to finally realize the Zionist dream of establishing a Jewish state in Israel.
We hear a lot about how Israel is occupying Gaza. However, Israel disengaged from Gaza in 2005. Can you talk us through the specific event and its impact on the current events?
First of all, it was and it remains a very controversial issue within Israel. Particularly amongst Israel's right wing, it's a traumatic moment. And it was not a popular decision in certain quarters, in which Israel withdrew its settlements and settlers from Gaza, and in an attempt to better define its border with the Palestinians and Gaza. What was tragic and unfortunate about this engagement is, one, it was carried out unilaterally, so it wasn't in coordination with the Palestinians. But what's tragic is that ultimately Hamas seized power in Gaza between 2005 and 2007. First, it won an election in 2006, and then after election, it basically it fought a mini civil war with Fatah in Gaza. It purged all of the main Fatah political elites from Gaza, and basically conducted a military takeover. And it's important to emphasize that Hamas, immediately after Israel left in 2005, went on the offensive against Israel. Israel withdrew. And Hamas interpreted that as Israeli weakness. They interpreted that not as Israel wants peace, you get your territory, we'll stick to ours, and let's live side by side. Hamas interpreted that as our strategy is working. Terrorism works. weak Israel has withdrawn, so we're going to continue the fight. And when Gaza refused to accept the quartet, which was a group of international powers that was sort of trying to steer the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, rejected the quartet's conditions for Hamas's rule in Gaza. Israel imposed restrictions on Gaza's access to the outside world, and the feeling in Israel was, well, if Hamas is going to turn Gaza into a launching pad of confrontation and resistance against Israel, why should Israel help that? And so the 2005 to 2007 window was critical because, there were some, particularly on the left in the peace camp in Israel, that said, okay, we'll withdraw from Gaza and maybe the Gazans will turn Gaza into a Singapore along the Mediterranean, and this, and we'll all be able to live together. And it seems almost surreal to say something that some people believe that, but I think that there was hope amongst the more idealistic here that could happen. But 2005 to 2007, Hamas, as soon as Israel withdrew, went on the offensive. And I think it's important for everyone to remember that there is no the siege on Gaza is a Hamas siege on Gaza. They set the conditions for you could argue the Israeli restrictions by basically being belligerent from day one after Israel's withdrawal.
What do you think could be the possible ramifications on the region after the events of October 7th?
October 7th, certainly a turning point for us here in Israel, and regionally it may be a turning point as well. It's a little bit too early to tell. One of the serious concerns I think everyone in the region has these days is that Israel's response to October 7th is going to lead to a regional war, and to a certain extent we're already seeing signs that it's happening. The question is what's the scale of it, and how many other players get drawn into this war? So, for example, we've seen the Houthis in Yemen just even today launching missiles at southern Israel in support of Hamas, and the Houthis receive, like Hamas, they receive military training, financing, and support from Iran. We've seen a slow motion escalation, limited escalation by Hezbollah along Israel's northern border in southern Lebanon. And we've heard some very provocative warnings or threats, as one might read into them, from senior Iranian officials, from the president to the foreign minister to the supreme leader. Provocative, threatening statements that suggest that they would intervene. And so there's a real concern that, if Iran intervenes either directly or indirectly through its proxies, that this war will widen because the United States will feel it needs to intervene. And then potentially Iran begins to strike at American partners in the region, particularly in the Gulf. And all of a sudden, Israel's conflict with Hamas turns into something far wider. And of course, it's all premature, right, to talk about those kinds of scenarios right now. We have to see how things evolve on the ground, but it's certainly something that's being talked about in capitals around the world.